Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
please, yes, sir. Send me the winners' names, sir.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll do that.
Thank you.
So,
Resident.
good evening, all. I welcome on behalf of Surgical Society Bangalore. I welcome all for the MCM conducted by St. John's Medical College Hospital. So I welcome Dr. S.G. Subramaniam, Professor and Head, Department of General Surgery, St. John's Medical College, to proceed with the meeting, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Harish. Good evening, everyone. It's our pleasure to host this month's MCM. It's the 8th meeting which is being done. And on behalf of Department of Surgery, St. John's Medical College and management, I would like to express our deep gratitude to Surgical Society Bangalore, especially President Venkat and Harish and other EC members and Surgical Society members for giving us opportunity to share our scientific material with you all. As we planned, we started our PG program at 5:45 and we are well in time. It's good that 55 residents participated in this quiz, and we can move on to the poster session now. We got totally 7 posters, 5 from general surgery and 2 from specialties. If it is okay, we'll start with poster session, Dr. Harish.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Dr. Shrikantaya HC will be judging this session, sir.
Okay.
So 3 minutes for the presentation and 2 minutes for the questions from the judges.
Okay.
And all other questions they can put it in a chat box, sir. We can answer, and even the candidate can answer.
Okay.
Yeah, please proceed, sir.
Yeah, we'll start with first poster by Dr. Manu. He is PG in surgery. His paper poster will be peripheral vascular complications in COVID-19 patients. Dr. Manu, you can share your screen.
I request all other postgraduates to be prepared for the next presentation. So since it is a first presentation, so we can have this lacunar time. So for the next presentation, please be prepared.
It's ready actually. Manu,
Yes.
if you are ready.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Dr. Manu, please proceed. Your time limit is 3 minutes.
Respected President Dr. Venkatachala, Honorable Secretary Dr. Harisha, respected HOD of St. John's Medical Surgical Department, Dr. Subramaniam, and everyone else, good evening to one and all. I'm presenting a poster on peripheral vascular complications in COVID-19 patients. Severe acute respiratory syndrome due to coronavirus has become a pandemic all over the world, affecting millions of patients in the world. It is documented that it affects respiratory tract infection, but it is also linked to coagulopathies and ischemic risk, mostly due to increase in the inflammatory reaction, causing increase of pro-aortic cytokines. If not diagnosed early, it can lead to complications like chronic lymphocytic ischemia, ischemia, MI. These complications can be life. This study shows a common pattern of ischemic events. And the objective of the study was to pattern of the thrombotic events in COVID-19 to plan management and vascular complications of COVID-19 patients. The observations were we observed 31 COVID patients admitted under surgery department and ICU with vascular complications from November 2020. We observed that around 86% of patients were males, which they were mostly in the older age group, most commonly between 41 to 60 years of age. Most common comorbidities among these patients were diabetes, hypertension, and coronary artery disease. These patients presented during the active infection. Around 65% of the patients were during active infection, and 35% patients was presented as post-COVID sequelae. Among the patients with peripheral artery disease symptom, 25% of patients had respiratory symptoms, and among peripheral artery disease, 58% patients had gangrene. And when examined the type of thrombosis, majority of the patients had orbital artery thrombosis and femoral artery thrombosis. We also noticed there were patients with aortic aorta, mesenteric artery, iliac, tibial, radial, ulnar, and brachial artery thrombosis also. Among all the patients, 58% of the patients underwent surgical intervention, among which 52% patients underwent major amputations, 22% underwent minor amputation, and around 15% underwent bypass, and 11% underwent thrombectomy. Hence, the patient with risk factors for atherosclerosis were more prone for acute ischemic events in COVID-19. And COVID-related limb ischemia is most likely to end up in amputation. Thank you.
Anu, thank you. You are well in time. If there is any question from judge and others, be there to answer.
Questions from the judge? Dr.
I would request there is audio disturbance from somebody's login.
Just I'm muting everybody except the presenter. Just
Dr. Harish Srikanta here.
yeah, please, sir. Sir, ask the question, sir.
Yeah, I have seen the e-poster. Good enough. We can move on to the next.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Subramaniam, sir.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And it's for all people who are presenting. If there is any questions on the chat box later, please answer them in the chat box. We'll move on to the second poster. This is by Dr. Vishnu Mohan. The title is Unusual Causes of Intestinal Obstruction, Internal Hernia. Dr. Vishnu Mohan is PG in surgery. Dr. Vishnu, you can share your screen.
Yes, sir.
I missed my unit presentation. My minute.
Oh. Good evening to everyone. Greetings to the respected President Dr. Venkatacharya, the Honorary Secretary Dr. Harisha, and respected HOD of St. John's Medical College, the Surgery Department, Dr. Subramanian. Today, I'm presenting a PPT on rare causes of internal hernia and our experience with this. This is a presentation from the Department of General Surgery Week 2. Hernia is a protrusion of organs contained in the abdominal cavity through a normal or abnormal aperture, or from a weakness in the wall. An internal hernia is also defined as a protrusion through a peritoneal or mesenteric aperture within the confines of the peritoneal cavity. Internal hernias have a autopsy incidence of 0.2 to 0.9%. As it causes small bowel obstruction in around 0.6 to 5.8% of the cases. Now the challenge is that it's rare diagnosis, as actually the diagnosis to be the challenge of both the clinician and the radiologist. The causes for the same congenital anomalies the internal rotation of the organs, which is the most common cause. Atrophy of the mental, dilation of the phenomena of insulin, inflammatory instability process of the cavities, and iatrogenesis with the abdominal cell. There are multiple types of internal hernias. Paraduodenal hernia is the most common, followed by pericephal hernia, and transomental defect. As in case of scale, this is a colicky duration of 5 months, which was insidious in onset and rapidly progressive with no radiation, due to loss of fluid loss, postprandial and substandard medications. She also gave history of significant weight loss for over 5 months and history of intermittent constipation. There are no positive findings during this examination and blood investigations with normal. So we did a CT. CT was suggestive of internal hernia, but intraoperatively we found that our normal was to the left paraduodenal fossa with multiple interval ablations. So she underwent laparoscopic assisted reduction of hernia contents plus additional lysis and closure of mouth of pelvic sac. Post-operative period was uneventful and postprandial symptoms relieved, and she was discharged on post-operative home. This is a photograph showing the closure of the mouth of hernia. This second case report, we present Mr. N, 123-year-old male, who came with complaints of recurrent vomiting, indication of pain of the mental password. Vomiting was insidious, not projectile, released particles, and occurs usually after 1 hour of the next session. He also complained of pain abdomen, which is very unusual, insidious, complete type, with no radiation and relieved after vomiting. He also gave a history of significant weight loss. Physical examination has no positive findings. We are undergone EGD, which shows pictures of high concern. CT findings were proximal follower loops that on the right side with reversal of assembly and assembly relationship. With the fissure suggestive mid-bed malrotation. This intraoperatively, we found that this is the small bowel was herniating into the mesocolic fold produced by the ileocolic artery of right colon. And he had done a laparoscopic reduction of internal hernia plus obliteration of the mouth of the hernia sac and the cheek. Post-operative period was uneventful and he was discharged on post-operative.
Your time is up. You can conclude.
Which may say that internal hernias are rare cause of intestinal obstruction associated with high mortality. Primary internal hernia should be considered in the differential diagnosis, and especially with non-specific findings, and a high index of clinical suspicion and urgent CT is indicated. Early surgical intervention is crucial to avoid the high mobility and mortality.
Thank you, Vishnu. Shrikanta, sir, any questions?
No particular question, but he was very fast and he couldn't be heard. That's the only general suggestion for everybody else.
Yes, yes, sir. That's a comment and suggestion by the judge, not only to you, Vishnu, all others residents who are going to present today.
Yes, sir.
Please louder and be clear about your speech. So we are not able to follow your presentation. So I request all other PGs to do the same, please.
Yes,
yeah, thank you, Dr. Vishnu. We'll move on to the next. Okay.
Thank you, Vishnu. We'll move on to the third poster by Dr. Ajay Francis. He is PG in surgery. Solitary nodule thyroid, reality. Dr. Ajay, you can share your screen.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. So today, my poster today is solitary nodule thyroid, really. So I'm myself, Ajit Tom Francis, presenting for Unit 3 of surgery St. John's Hospital. So coming to the case in detail, we have a 50-year-old female who presented with acute onset abdominal pain since 4 days associated with multiple episodes of vomiting. There was history of obstipation. Patient was hemodynamically stable. And on examination, we found a thyroid swelling. And per abdomen, patient had generalized tenderness. And coming to the lab investigation, total count was 21,000. LFT, total bilirubin was elevated, and also amylase lipase was elevated, which came to the conclusion of acute pancreatitis. So then we did a ultrasound abdomen, which confirmed the diagnosis, and we did a ultrasound neck for the thyroid swelling. So in the course of the hospital stay, patient developed psychosis, for which we did a calcium and plasma TSH, which showed hypocalcemia and elevated pH levels. So for this came to the conclusion of hyperparathyroidism. So we did a sustainability scan, which showed no evidence of hyperfunction in parathyroid gland. And so for localization, we did a FNAC of the swelling, which showed colloid thyroid. Then we did a 4D CT neck to localize the lesion, which showed a multi-located peripherally enhancing cystic thyroid lesion in the left thyroid fossa, suggesting of left superior parathyroid, as you can see in the CT image. So what we did was bilateral neck exploration with left superior parathyroidectomy, and left superior parathyroid gland was 60 with a size of 8 into 5 into 3 centimeter, which was excised. Thyroid and other parathyroids were identified and resolved. And INDRA of previous monitoring showed a 50% fall in post-thyroidectomy samples, that is from 900 it fell to 110. So coming to the discussion, primary hyperparathyroidism is the most common cause of hypercalcemia in outpatient population, and parathyroid adenoma is the most common cause of primary hyperparathyroid. That is it comes to about 80%. So this case is special in the sense that it was a giant parathyroid adenoma that is more than 3.5 gram, and it's a rare case of primary hyperparathyroidism. About 1.5 to 30% of patients with primary hyperparathyroids develop acute pancreatitis. So sustainability scan is sensitivity is 79%, and 4D CT, which has high sensitivity of 89%, positive predictive value of 93.5, which is demonstrated in this case. So surgery is the only curative treatment and can be minimally and invasive or a comprehensive parathyroidectomy. So thank you.
Thank you, Ajay.
Good pictures, Ajay, and you presented well. Good.
Any questions, sir? Srikanth, sir?
Ajay, sir, no particular questions.
Okay, sir. Any questions from the audience?
Can proceed, sir.
Yeah, okay, then we'll move on to the next poster, again by Dr. Ajay. Our experience of surgeries in COVID-19 patients. Ajay, you can go on.
So once again, good evening to everyone. So coming to our experience in COVID surgeries, presenting myself, Ajay Tom Francis, for Unit 4 of General Surgery Department, St. John's Hospital. So coming to the introduction, so COVID-19 had a substantial effect on surgeons and patients who require surgical care. So the specific issues, which included inability to efficiently regulate delivery of surgical care, detrimental effects on patients with surgical disease, financial implications of the pandemic on healthcare systems, management of surgical workforce shortages, and emotional toll of all involved. So what we did was a retrospective study with 40 cases were reviewed for their mode of presentation, diagnosis, and treatment. Patients were followed up for post-op complications, morbidity, and mortality. So the statistical analysis which we did showed the average age of 50 plus or minus 10, and there were 36 male in patients and 4 females. And the average hospital stay was 10 days, and the number of patients who was discharged against medical advice were 6. So among the total number of cases, the most common was perforation and diabetic foot, which came about 7 each. And then coming to the type of perforation which involved, the most common perforation was pre-pylori, coming about the most common was duodenal, which is about 43%. And then the next common cause of thrombosis, which came about two cases of aortoiliac and AV fistula thrombosis was present. And the number of ICU admissions were 21. That is all of which around 5% was because there is 5 cases were due to perforation, that comes around 24%. And coming to the deaths, there were a total 12 number of deaths, and 17%. The most common cause was because of perforation, necrotizing fasciitis, and diabetic foot. So coming to the conclusions, so because of this, we have deducted that the hospital stay duration has increased due to the involvement of COVID in patients. There is severe financial burden on patients, which makes them to go against our medical advice. And about 50% of patients require ICU admission due to COVID complications. And mortality among the COVID patients in our hospital was around 30%. And the number of patients going DAMA was 15%. That's all. Thank you.
Ajay,
Thanks, Ajay.
Yes, sir.
how do you directly attribute all your surgical cases to COVID-19?
Sir, I didn't get your question, sir.
Your cases, you put up the pie chart. Can you go back
Yes,
to the
sir.
pie chart?
Which one, sir? That's or
This case, man, COVID-19 in surgical cases. The different
Go back.
surgical cases.
this one, sir?
Your pie chart, man, in your presentation.
Go to the slides. Go back.
Yeah, exactly. So now, how is it directly related to COVID-19 disease?
Sir, most of these patients wouldn't require ICU admissions if it was a regular perforation. Because of this COVID morbidity, the post-op after GA, they were unable to extubate the patient. So mostly it is because of COVID that these patients went to ICU. Otherwise, they could have been monitored in a ITU setup.
Now, what's the cause of thrombosis?
Thrombosis, sir, there are different. Actually, there are different studies which have associated thrombosis with COVID. There is an increased chance of having thrombosis in the case of COVID. The procoagulants are more during COVID times, as we usually monitor D-dimers, prothrombin time, everything. So these are dearranged in COVID disease. So it increases the chances of having thrombosis in patients.
Okay.
Any questions from the members? Then we'll move
Thank
on
you,
to the.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the 5th poster. This will be by Dr. Gibi. Rare cause of retroperitoneal hematoma in post-vaccinated COVID patients. Dr. Kimi, you can share your slides.
Hello.
Go on.
Good evening, everyone. Presenting my poster topic, which is rare case of retroperitoneal hematoma in a post-vaccinated COVID patient. My moderator is Dr.
Your
Shahnaz.
slide has to come. Your slide has to come.
ECB.
Good evening, everyone.
Go on, Dr. Kimi.
Kimi,
Yes, sir.
you have to share your screen.
So sharing, sir.
Yeah, go on.
Good evening, sir. My poster topic is rare cause of retroperitoneal hematoma in a post-vaccinated COVID patient. I'm presenting for Unit 5 surgery team. My moderator is Dr. Shahnaz. Presenting a 42-year-old female who was vaccinated for COVID-19 with first dose. On 25th of May, she came to the hospital on 11th of June with complaints of headache and cough since 15 days, pain in the left thigh with bluish discoloration since 4 days, and pain abdomen since 4 days. She's also a known case of hyperthyroidism since 20 years on medication, non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis since 2018 on regular follow-up, status post-clinic artery embolization, EVL banding in 2018, and type 2 diabetes mellitus since 2 months on medication. On examination, on inspection, abdomen appeared distended. There was no dilated veins. There was a bluish discoloration which was seen on the anterior and medial aspect of the left thigh, and there was also a bluish discoloration which was seen on the lumbar region on both the sides. On palpation, tenderness was present. However, there was no guarding or rigidity. Investigations on the day of admission, her HP was 5.5, total count of 9,800, platelets of 1.2 lakhs, PT of 16, and INR of 1.33. CCT was done, and it showed left iliopsoas heterogeneous collection around 480 ml. It was seen extending along the iliopsoas tendon into the proximal thigh. There was no contrast extravasation noted. Initially, the patient was planned to be managed conservatively. However, she developed serial drop in HB, for which CT angio was done, which showed active extravasation from the lumbar artery. Embolization of the lumbar artery was done on 15th of June. Patient post embolization, the patient was shifted to ICU for hemodynamic monitoring, where she developed shock and was on minimal inotrope. However, she had serial drop of HB. So repeat CT angio was done on 16th, which showed contrast extravasation at the right femoral artery at the angio axis site. Injection TISL was injected ultrasound guided at the right femoral artery site, following which there was no further drop in hemoglobin, and patient improved symptomatically. Most common causes of retroperitoneal hematoma are traumatic vascular injury, ruptured aortic aneurysm, retroperitoneal neoplasm, and coagulopathy. Spontaneous causes are anticoagulation or fibrinolytic therapy. Rare causes include lumbar artery bleed with retroperitoneal hematoma. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kimi.
Yes, sir.
Srikanth, sir, any questions?
No, no particular question.
Any questions from the audience?
Thank you, sir.
Okay. We'll go to the next e-poster. This will be by Dr. Bharadwaj. He's a senior resident in the pediatric surgery. Topic is gastric teratoma masquerading as melena in newborn. Dr. Bharadwaj, you can present.
Recording in progress.
Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, yes. Go on, Bharadwaj.
Good evening, everyone. So I'll be presenting a case which is actually a melena in a neonate, but with a rare cause.
Yes.
I'm Dr. Purnendu from Department of Pediatric Surgery under the guidance of Dr. Shubha, who's the
Please tell me, sir. Please tell me. Good evening. Very good evening.
So melena itself is actually a benign and self-limiting condition, which is seen in about 1 in 350 to 400 live births. Most common cause being swallowed maternal blood or in the perinatal period. As you can see in this chart here, the most common cause is the swallowed maternal blood. Other than that, esophagitis, gastritis, or other causes. Less common causes are coagulopathy, hemorrhage, disease of the newborn, and sepsis. So this baby was actually a 40-day-old baby boy who presented with melena since birth. Poor activity for about
Hello?
Please unmute. Please unmute from the St. John's Medical College system. Please unmute.
Hello.
Please. Okay. Audible now.
Yeah,
Proceed.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Please
go on.
proceed.
Yes, sir. So, sir, till where I was audible, should I start again?
You can start from introduction.
Okay, sir. So this melena in a neonate is a benign and self-limiting condition. It is seen in about 1 in 350 to 400 live births. Most common cause being swallowed maternal blood in the perinatal period. Mostly it is either that or it can be esophagitis or gastritis. Less common causes being coagulopathy, hemorrhagic disease of newborn, or sepsis. These are the most common causes of melena. So this baby was actually a 40-day-old baby boy with melena since birth, poor activity since about 15 days, evaluated outside, given blood transfusions. This was the color of the stool pattern. So the feeding was normal all throughout. The urinary stream was normal. The stool pattern, other than the color, was normal. And there was no history of any neonatal jaundice. The only thing was an antenatal scan, 32nd week, revealed that there was a lesion in the left upper quadrant. That's all. So on examination, baby was had poor activity, weak cry, listless, heart rate of about 145, BP 70/45. Peripheries were well perfused with a CRT of less than 3 seconds. Weight was 4 kg. But baby was having severe pallor, but no icterus. This was the findings. So it was actually a mass that was occupying the left upper quadrant, epigastric region, hypochondric region, as well as left iliac region. It was like a irregular, firm, bilobar kind of a mass, no notch, and was moving with respiration. So once the child was resuscitated, child was evaluated, HB was 5, total counts were normal, platelets were normal, liver function tests were normal, and the coagulation pattern was also normal. AFP was 289, which is normal for the age. So then further on, a CT scan was done, which revealed that this is the normal liver. This here is the lesion. So the lesion, is having actually a rim, enhancing rim, and some calcifications inside. These calcifications were also seen in the non-contrast images. So what could this be? First thought has to go at this age group, retroperitoneal tumor, gastric duplication cyst. So retroperitoneal tumor will actually arise from the retroperitoneum, push up the vessels, which was not the case in this. It was mostly an anterior lesion. Gastric duplication cyst will not have any calcification, so mental cyst will be homogeneous. So basically it looked like a teratoma in that region. These were the intra-op findings. So we went ahead with the laparotomy. It showed that this is basically the stomach, the greater curvature lifted up. This is the lesion here, the pancreas, and the spleen. So here, once incising the normal stomach wall, we could see the exophytic as well as endoluminal component of the lesion. This is how it was, the lesion. The HP came back as mature teratoma. Only a very few previous case reports are there of a gastric teratoma at this age. No report of an antenatally diagnosed gastric teratoma. The treatment for mature gastric teratoma is primary surgery, no chemotherapy, and no recurrences have been noted till date. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Purnendu. So,
No particular questions, sir.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? Okay. Thank you, Purnendu. We'll move on to the last paper. This will be by Dr. Kuldeep. Urological problems during COVID-19 pandemic observational study. He may not be there, I think.